It was 2022, late Sunday night, somewhere along Highway 101 on the Northern California coast. Long empty stretches, no cell service, barely any lights. Just you, the road, and the dark pressing in from every side. I left around 8 p.m. I know? Stupid. I had an early shift Monday and figured I'd rather just push through than stay an extra night. It started near Trinidad. 1 minute, I had clear visibility. The next, I could barely see 20 feet past my hood. Not gradually, fast, like someone had flipped a switch. Within 5 minutes, the world beyond my headlights simply ceased to exist. I slowed to 35 and kept moving. About 30 minutes into the fog, my headlights caught a figure on the shoulder. At first, it was just a shape, a dark outline maybe 50 feet ahead. As I got closer, I could make out a man, tall, standing completely still, facing the road. Not waving, not on his phone, not doing anything, just standing there. I slowed to make sure I didn't clip him if he stepped out. He didn't move. He didn't even turn his head as I passed. I got a clear look at his face. Nothing unusual. Nothing that explained why he was standing in that exact spot, on that empty stretch of highway, in the middle of a fog bank, doing absolutely nothing. My first thought was car trouble. Maybe he'd broken down somewhere and was waiting for help. Except there was no car on the shoulder. I thought briefly about turning around, but something told me not to. So I kept driving. 10 minutes later, I saw him again. I'm not exaggerating. Same man. Yeah, same dark clothes. Same rigid, motionless stance. Same empty expression. I said, "What the hell?" out loud to an empty car. There was no way he'd gotten ahead of me. I was the only vehicle on that road. No cross streets, no shortcuts, nothing. Then he turned and looked directly at me. The moment our eyes locked, I felt it. That specific visceral wrongness you can't manufacture. His head didn't drift toward me. It snapped. I looked away immediately and pressed the gas, pushing up to 45 despite the fog. The fog only thickened. When my headlights lit up, something in the road ahead, not on the shoulder this time, in the middle, a figure standing dead center in my lane, blocking the way. He didn't move when I slowed. I didn't flinch when I hit the brights. Just stood there like he'd been planted. I stopped the car. We sat there in a standstill. Me behind the wheel. Him in front of me. Neither of us moving. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel him looking at me. I put the car in reverse. That's when I glanced at my rearview mirror and felt my stomach drop. There was someone back there, a second figure, walking slowly toward my car through the fog. I didn't think. I just acted. I yanked the wheel hard right, crossed into the oncoming lane, and floored it around the guy in front of me. Then something hit my car. It wasn't a tap. It was violent. A massive, metal-crunching impact that sent the entire back end lurching sideways. But when I checked my mirrors, there was nothing behind me. Not the figures, not another car, not anything. Just fog and empty road. I drove the rest of the way home, with my hands shaking on the wheel. By the time I hit the 101 interchange, the fog had lifted, and my brain started to slow down. A vivid hallucination. Unusual, but not impossible. The figures, the standoff, the panic, all of it filed away under extreme fatigue. Then I walked around to the back of my car. The rear bumper was destroyed. A massive dent running almost the entire width of it. No paint transfer. That's the detail that kept nagging at me. A collision with another car would have left paint. There was none. I called the police to file a report. More to put the information somewhere than out of any real expectation they could help. I've spent 4 years sitting with that night. The explanation I keep landing on is this. The figures were a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and the fog, and in my panic, I sideswiped a guardrail or a mile marker I never saw coming. It's tidy. It almost works, except that a hallucination and a real collision happening simultaneously is its own kind of impossible. I don't have an answer. What I have is a dent. This one happened just a few weeks ago. Spring break, senior year. My hometown is one of those places that sits close enough to a city to feel suburban, but far enough away to have none of the actual benefits. I've been trying to cut back on some habits, alcohol, nicotine, and figured being home with nothing to do was either going to destroy that effort or give me a chance to reset. I chose the reset. Workouts every morning, runs every afternoon. Keep moving. Stay out of my own head. That's how I ended up on the trail on a Tuesday around 5 p.m. There's a loop I used to run in high school. Exactly 3 miles, start to finish, beginning and ending at my house. I noticed the fog the moment I stepped outside. It was thick in a way that felt almost artificial, like the world had been quietly erased past 40 feet. I thought about scrapping the run, but I knew that trail by heart. One path, no forks, no branches. The fog was even denser under the tree cover, blocking what was left of the afternoon light. I couldn't see more than 15 or 20 feet ahead, but I kept a steady pace and tracked my distance on my Garmin watch. The first 1.5 miles was fine. The problem started at the 2.5 mile mark. At that point on the loop, I should have been nearing the end of the trail. I told myself the watch was wrong. It was 4 years old. The GPS probably couldn't cut through the tree coverage. I kept running. I passed 3 miles. 3 miles is the full loop. At 3 miles, I should have been standing in my driveway. I was still in the woods. My watch clicked to 3.1. Still ticking up, even though I wasn't moving. I made a decision. Turn around, retrace my steps, find the trailhead. The fog had gotten worse. I didn't know how that was possible, but it had. At around the 4 mile mark total, I heard something. The woods are almost always silent. The closest I can describe it is a drone. Low, sustained, wavering. It would swell upward, then dip, then swell again. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't someone calling for help. It wasn't pain. It was something I genuinely had no reference for. And that absence of reference was the most frightening part. I ran faster. And the faster I pushed, the more the exhaustion compounded the fear. This awful loop of running harder and getting more scared and running harder still. The sound didn't stop. It didn't get further away. Whatever was out there was keeping pace with me. Every time I glanced back, there was only haze. Then, without warning, I broke out of the trees. I stumbled into the street and nearly collapsed. My lungs were burning. My legs were done. I turned back toward the trail. There was something standing just inside the tree line. It was tall. Far too tall. I'm 6'1", and this thing had at least a foot on me, maybe more. It wasn't coming toward me. It wasn't retreating. It was just there, swaying gently, almost imperceptibly, back and forth. The droning had stopped. The woods were silent again. I turned and ran home without looking back. That image, the black mass, the sway, the silence after the sound, is still right there every time I close my eyes. My parents think it was a tall person trying to scare me, maybe follow me. But it doesn't fit what I experienced. You can't sprint through dense fog, through trees, for that distance, use them while sustaining that sound. Not a person. I don't know what was in those woods. I'm not sure I want to. This was about 6 years ago, late September. My buddy Edwin and I had been talking about kayaking Willipa Bay for almost 2 years. We finally locked in a weekend and committed. Willipa Bay is a massive tidal estuary on the Washington coast, about 25 miles long, mostly oyster farms and wildlife refuge. On a clear day, it's one of the most peaceful places I've ever been. The weekend we chose was not a clear day. I want to be upfront about something. Neither of us were inexperienced. We'd both been kayaking since childhood. Edwin had worked as a guide for 3 summers during college. We had a GPS, a compass, proper gear. We launched early Saturday morning from a put-in near Nakota. The fog was heavy, but coastal fog usually burns off by mid-morning. The first hour was calm. Dense fog has this muffling quality. Sound gets swallowed, distance compresses, and you end up paddling through something that feels more like cotton than water. Edwin was about 15 feet to my left the whole time. Around 9 in the morning, I heard something. Splashing. I thought it was Edwin at first, but when I looked over, his paddle was resting across his kayak. He was already looking at me. We both went still and listened. It was oars, not paddles. Oars. Anyone who spent time on the water knows the difference in sound. Steady and rhythmic, coming from somewhere off to our right. Maybe 100 feet away, somewhere invisible in the fog. Edwin figured it was a fisherman checking crab pots. Not unusual for the bay. We waited for them to call out or come into view, but the rowing just continued. The same unhurried pace. No voice, no signal, no acknowledgement that we existed. Edwin called out into the fog. Hello? Nothing. The rhythm didn't change at all. We started paddling again, figuring we'd either cross paths or they'd drift on. But over the next 20 minutes, something strange settled in. That rowing sound, it never got closer. It never got further. We changed direction. We changed pace. The sound maintained the exact same distance and the exact same rhythm, like a metronome set to haunt us. At some point, Edwin and I stopped talking. We both felt it. That low-grade wrongness you can't quite name. Then the fog thinned for a moment. Just briefly, just enough. And I saw it. A small wooden rowboat sitting still in the water, about 50 yards out. A figure at the oars. Distinct, real, and then the fog folded back in and they were gone. 3 seconds maybe. Edwin saw it too. That was enough for me. I wanted off the water. We shifted course toward shore, paddling steadily, trying not to look like we were running. The rowing sounds followed us the entire way. Same distance, same rhythm. Then the fog lifted, not completely, but enough. Suddenly we could see 100 yards in every direction. I looked immediately to where the sound had been coming from. Open water. I looked behind us. Open water. I looked left, right, everywhere I could think to check. The bay was empty, no boat, no figure, nothing. Edwin's face told me everything I needed to know about how we were both feeling. We kept paddling without speaking. 5 minutes later, we hit the shore. I jumped out into knee-deep water, cold enough to shock, but I barely registered it. I just needed solid ground under my feet. We pulled our kayaks up and stood there, on the beach, catching our breath, staring back at the bay. Edwin wandered a little further up the sand and called me over. I jogged to catch up. He was looking at footprints, wet, barefoot impressions, fresh enough that water was still pooling in the deepest ones. They came out of the bay, walked up the sand toward the tree line, turned and followed the shoreline a short distance, and then cut back into the woods and disappeared. They came from the direction where that boat would have been. I traced the trail backward with my eyes. The prints had originated further down the shore. Whoever made them had walked along the waterline, passed directly through the spot where we just landed, and gone into the forest. We'd been on that beach for less than 10 minutes. I wanted to follow the footprints backward, away from the trees, toward their origin. Edwin thought I was losing my mind. Edwin didn't want to go. He also didn't want to be left alone. After half a minute of back and forth, he followed me. We walked along the shore, keeping the footprints to our left, moving toward wherever they began. After 2 or 3 minutes, I saw it, pulled up on the sand at an angle, maybe 50 yards down the beach. A small wooden rowboat, dark wood, almost black, oars resting inside. The same boat, I was certain. Same shape, same color, same size as the one I'd glimpsed through the fog on the water. And leading away from it, wet footprints, heading in our direction. I started walking toward the boat. Edwin grabbed my arm. He didn't debate it this time. He just said we were leaving. His voice had a quality I'd never heard from him before. Not quite fear, something past it. The kind of calm that only comes when someone has decided the situation is genuinely beyond what they're willing to engage with. That snapped me out of it. Think about the timeline. We'd been on the water for over 2 hours, and whoever was in that rowboat, a slower vessel, had somehow reached land before us, walked the length of the beach to the exact spot where we happened to land, and vanished into the trees. All of that before we'd even pulled our kayaks up. We turned around and walked back. Edwin was nearly jogging. Watching him move that fast only made it worse for me. We shoved the kayaks into the water and paddled out without another word. Neither of us looked back at the tree line. I've turned that morning over in my head for 6 years. The only explanation that doesn't require something deeply strange is an elaborate prank. Someone who somehow knew our route, our landing spot, and had a plan in place before we arrived. But that raises more questions than it answers. What keeps returning to me is the timeline. The math doesn't work. The footprints leading from the water to the exact place we beached, still wet when we found them. That doesn't explain itself either. I don't know what any of it means, but I know fog differently now. And I know that sometimes the thing keeping pace with you, just beyond the edge of visibility, is not something the fog will reveal when it lifts. Sometimes it's already gone, and sometimes it's already there waiting.